I just finished volume 8 of High School DxD, and it was a whole lot of nothing. But it was a fun nothing. So this volume is just a compilation of filler episodes. It's like a bunch of mini stories that don't really feel canon to the original story. Some of them are good, some of them are okay, and some of them are bad, and the bad ones are really bad. But there's really only one story that's actually important to our characters, and it happens at the end, which I don't really understand. I would give a spoiler warning for volume 8, but you aren't really missing too much if you skip this volume, so it doesn't really matter. A small nitpick that I have on this volume is the fact that it took me so long to realize that this volume was just stories. It kind of just led to me being disappointed, and when I got to a story that I didn't like, I was really close to dropping the volume. But luckily, I kept going and I actually was able to finish it. But I think this volume's biggest problem is with its framing. Since they put the most important story last and put a bunch of goofy random stories first, I could see a lot of people dropping this volume when they realize that it just doesn't seem important. But let's get into the stories. So the first two stories are actually those two filler episodes that we saw in season 1. The one with Susan and the familiar one. So if you want to skip past that, go to this timestamp. And if you want to skip past all the goofy stories and go straight to the important one, skip to this timestamp. But for those who stuck around, let's go through all of these stories one by one and give them a score 1 through 10. The first story is one that we've already seen in the anime. It's the one with that samurai girl, Susan. So I'll kind of try to go over this quickly. Issei wakes up from a nap and Rias is next to him naked. She's there because she wants him to get a contract. And if he is able to get the contract, she'll let him touch her breast. So he's super excited and pumped to do this. We actually get like a surprisingly good moment of like Rainier trauma, I guess, where Issei asks why she's naked and she says she wants to use Issei as a pillow / doll, and Issei starts thinking that that's all he is to her, just a doll that she can use. It's always nice to see them adding more fuel to this character arc that Issei's going through, and I'm glad that they didn't just completely forget about this trauma, because it doesn't come out of nowhere in the light novel, and this makes the eventual breakdown way more impactful. So everyone's in the club room and we get the typical interactions. Issei being a pervert, Konako hitting him, and then Issei yelling at Kiba because he's jealous of him. And while that's happening, they get a request from someone, and Issei and Rias go out to complete it so that Issei can get his first contract. I kind of skipped over it, but that whole club room scene where they were all together was actually pretty funny. I was just having a hard time adjusting to the time going back, since the story technically takes place like in season 1, but they teleport to the apartment where the request came from, and it's decorated in old Japanese military and samurai stuff, and I think this is the best part of the story. Susan isn't Japanese, but she's obsessed with Japanese culture to an almost cringy level. She tries speaking this broken Japanese, and it feels like the author is making fun of like Westerners that like to identify as like otakus. And this whole joke really has aged so well, because I do see so many people acting kind of like Susan, but Susan appears out of nowhere and she just needs them to get her notebook from her school. So they go out to do that, and while they're doing that, we find out that Susan is kind of insane. She might be the weirdest person we've ever seen. She doesn't take that armor off, she trains in it when she's bored, and she just kind of walks around everywhere in it. She just isn't normal. Rias said earlier that it was kind of a waste for her not to be a devil, and I actually completely agree. But they get the notebook, go back to the apartment, and complete the request. But while they're on their way out, Susan actually has another request for them, and this is a pretty funny scene with Issei. So anytime Susan does anything, it scares Issei. So even when she just asked for the request, it scared Issei. It's a funny dynamic, and when Susan is describing her request, Issei thinks that she's talking about killing someone, but obviously she's talking about confessing her love. Rias accepts the request to help her confess her love, and they all decide on a love letter. Honestly, this story really is done well. It's actually funny. Susan's supposed to be one of those Westerners that thinks they understand Japanese culture, but they ultimately don't. And Rias isn't from Japan, so she also doesn't understand Japanese culture. So she thinks Susan's actually really cool, and she thinks what she's saying makes sense. And then you have Issei, who actually is Japanese, and he's just pointing out all the ridiculous things that she's saying and doing. It just works really well, and it's just so entertaining. And I was still entertained even though I've already seen the story. But she finishes the letter and she decides to send it via arrow to the skull. She delivers the letter, and and then a few days later, we see them all waiting in the park for a response. And the person that shows up is of course a dude in Western knight armor, and he actually accepts the letter, and they live happily ever after. It really is strange how Issei somehow ends up surrounded by these weirdos. And I think it's pretty funny how Susan likes to mimic Japanese culture, while the knight dude is mimicking Western culture. I really hope that guy's Japanese, because that would just be the cherry on top. But since Issei successfully got his contract, he gets to touch Rias's breast. She gives him 5 seconds to do it, but of course before he can, everyone walks in the room and interrupts, and Issei runs out of time, and he gets his soul crushed, but at least Rias gives him a hug, and the story ends. It's a pretty solid story, very entertaining, and it was actually funny. Even though I had already seen it, I was still entertained like the whole way through, so I'll give it like a 7 out of 10. The next story is also one that we've already seen, and at this point I was getting a little suspicious of this volume, but I still kept reading. This is the familiar episode. We open up with Issei, Matsuda, and Murahama peeping in on girls' locker rooms. They're hiding in a girl's locker, and of course they get caught by Konako and beaten up. We cut back to the club room and we see typical character interactions. You know, Konoko's mad at Issei now. Asia says Issei can look at her body if he wants, and Rias kind of just says the same thing. But then Rias says that it's time for Issei and Asia to get familiars. And in case you forgot for some reason, familiars are basically just Pokemon for the DxD universe. So our characters have to go out and catch them all, except it's just one. So they all teleport to the forest of familiars. Yes, this time there's no tennis or volleyball match here, just straight to the forest. It's not like the anime. The familiar guide shows up, and he guides them around the forest to help them find a new familiar. And this guide is Issei's worst nightmare. He kind of seems to hate Issei. His suggestions for familiars are one of the Dragon Kings that's significantly stronger than Issei, and a serpent that has poison that's fatal to devils, and usually kills its master. And this obviously just makes Issei upset, and we get some funny reactions to these suggestions, like he wants to beat the familiar up. Issei's tired of the bad suggestions, so he says he just wants a cute familiar girl. The guide initially says that Issei's misguided, and he kind of ignores him until Asia says she wants the same thing, and he immediately complies with her. So they go to a lake to catch a sprite, and we get the famous steroid sprite scene from the anime. Issei was expecting a beautiful sprite to come out the lake, but instead a massive, muscular, mean looking sprite comes out instead. And this scene was done way better in the anime. Obviously the biggest reason is because you get a visual representation of what's going on, but it also drags on for way too long in the light novel. It goes by pretty quickly in the anime, and it just kind of makes it funnier. But in the light novel, Issei just comes off as more annoying than funny, so that was kind of disappointing. But we do get a funny moment where another similar looking sprite shows up, and the two steroid sprites just start fighting each other for territory, so at least that was funny. They move on, and the guy suggests the sprite dragon Rase. He says he's not as strong as the Dragon King, but he's still a top tier dragon, so Issei decides to catch him. But before that happens, of course we get the infamous yucky slime scene. Slime starts falling from the sky, and the slime eats the clothing off the girls until they're naked. You know, typical anime stuff. I'm not really a big fan of this anime trope. I've just seen it way too many times, and it's not really funny to me, but it's alright, I guess. But Issei decides that he wants this slime as his familiar, but before he can make that happen, the girls just destroy the slime. Issei tries to protect the last piece of slime, but thankfully Rase electrocutes Issei and destroys the last of the slime too. But the best part is, Rase doesn't just shock Issei, he also shocks the guide and Kiba. And we get like a funny little moment where Issei and Kiba both want to kill Rase. So Issei snaps and he has like a mini rage scene, but before he does anything, Asia steps in and protects Rase, and obviously Issei calms down after that. She makes Rase his familiar, and we find out that normally sprites don't like devils because devils are evil, but he likes Asia obviously because she has a pure heart, so that was pretty cool. But the story ends with Issei getting shocked by Rase and then crying for yucky slime. And this story was alright. It had some funny moments, but everyone there was kind of more annoying than they were funny. The guide is the most incompetent character ever, just giving terrible suggestions and just kind of being annoying to Issei. And then he had Issei, who was really annoying in the story. I mean, he can't take anything seriously. He's talking about getting some yucky slime as his familiar. He was just more annoying than he was funny. But there were still funny moments. and we got some added stuff too. But overall, I still think the anime did it a lot better. So I'll give it like a 5 out of 10. You know, nothing crazy. So now we're done with the ones that we've already seen, and we're on to the stories that didn't make it into the anime. So were these stories any good? Not this one. This is the one that almost made me skip the volume because I really didn't enjoy this story. It's a short one, so this shouldn't really take too long. But Issei's in the club room and Rias sneaks up on him and hugs him, but Issei strangely doesn't react. And he doesn't react because he was thinking about his past, back when he was in middle school. You see, I made a big mistake when I was reading this story, and when I got to this part of the story. I thought that Issei was going to be serious. I thought that we were legitimately going to get something important or something interesting out of Issei's character, and I was just completely wrong. Issei was being really vague about his backstory, and I got my hopes up. I was really hoping to learn something new about Issei, but instead we just got a story about Issei being groomed into being the person he is today. I think that's kind of what the story is, or what the story implies. Like, I'm not kidding, that's kind of the story. So Issei tells everyone to gather around the fireplace so he can tell a story about his childhood. He tells a story about this old man and boobs. It's like a homeless man that was at the park telling kids about boobs. He just tells Issei he can suck breasts as well as grope them. I really don't know why I thought we were going to get something interesting about Issei here, but man, this was just such a letdown. But yeah, this old dude would just go to the park and talk to kids about boobs and stuff. It was really weird. Luckily, that pedophile got arrested, and Issei says the old dude wasn't evil, but you have to be pretty twisted to teach kids how to suck breasts. So apparently this old dude is one of the reasons why Issei is as perverted as he is, and why he's so obsessed with boobs. And not surprisingly, I'm not the only person that thinks Issei sounds insane here, because all the people in the club room look at him like he's crazy, and I guess they all just leave. But later on, they're walking home, and Issei hears a familiar noise. It's the old man's bell that he used to ring to lure kids into his boob story traps. So he's back in action, like the Joker when he breaks out of Arkham Asylum, except instead of being the Joker, he's just a pedophile. And then the story ends with the old man telling Issei another story. Luckily, this story wasn't too long, but it was really just disappointing, and it was just really weird. So like, did that dude really just like groom him? Because that's kind of what I got from the story. I really wanted to see an actual backstory from Issei, not just like a comedy skit. So hopefully we'll actually get something better than whatever that was. But I'll give the story like a 3 out of 10 at best. I stopped reading after this. I started questioning myself. Do I have to read this? Is Issei a victim? Is Damian Priest really gonna beat Gunther at SummerSlam? No! I had way too many questions on my mind, so I took a break. A 4-month break. Yeah, when I finished the last volume, I was really hyped to get into this one, so I jumped in it immediately, and I was really disappointed at this point. So yeah, I took a break. But then I realized something. I realized who I am. I'm a fighter. So I went back in to finish the volume, and luckily the next story was a lot better than the last. And at this point I knew that this volume was just a bunch of short stories, so I didn't have my expectations too high, and I went in expecting dumb fun, and I got it. The next story is a significant upgrade from the last. Issei's in his room trying to figure out the meaning of the word opai, and for some reason this is like Issei's entire personality for all these stories. Issei's entire character is just that he likes boobs, and I'm not gonna lie, it gets kind of old. I mean, there's like 7 stories here, of course it gets old. But the team is in the club room waiting for Rias to get back from a chat with Sona. She comes back and we do learn something interesting about Rias. So Rias is supposed to be in the underworld schools, but she's in Japan as like a special privilege, but she still has to get credits for Devil School or she'll have to return. She gets them by making packs and studying Japan. For the studying Japan part, she has to make a report about the monsters living in the world. So yeah, that's the mission for today. Help Rias make her monster report. It's always nice to get little details about devils not named Issei. We get a funny moment where Rias is going through the monsters in the underworld. One of them's like a rapper devil that even Konako's a fan of, but then that dude left town. So then she goes to the next monster, which is like a headless knight that haunts Europeans, but that dude isn't here because he has hernia. I really feel like they just wanted to flex their monster knowledge, and you know, why not? But it was at this point where I realized that this this was probably going to be a good story. This story is just goofy fun. Luckily, Rias knows a person that has a lot of knowledge on the monsters living in this world. She's a human and she's the leader of the tennis club, so they go to the tennis courts to see her. And Issei's presence on the tennis court makes the schoolgirls uncomfortable there. They start booing him and they start wishing death upon him. And while they're there, the girl Rias was looking for pulls up with that headless knight from earlier. I guess she made that guy the mascot for the tennis club and all the girls love him. He gets love and Issei gets death threats. But Rias talks to the tennis girl and asks her if she can talk to her about monsters, and the girl shoots it down immediately. She really doesn't like devils, which is kind of strange because she knows that Issei and Rias are devils. So why would you go to a school ran by devils if you hate them and you know that they're devils? And she kind of went in on them too. Even I was starting to feel offended by the stuff she was saying about devils. And Rias kind of reasons with her, and then the girl eventually challenges Rias to a tennis match. If Rias wins, she'll give her the information, but if she wins, she gets to have Issei. And at first, Rias doesn't agree to these conditions, and then they start to go home, but then Akeno kind of just appears out of nowhere like Batman, and she gets Rias to agree. And we get a big epic tennis match, you know, kind of like in the anime, except instead of going against Sona, they're going against some random tennis girl. So they're doing 2 singles matches and 1 doubles match. The singles competitors are Akeno and Zenobia, and of course Issei and Rias are teamed up for the doubles match. Akeno wins her match pretty easily, and then Zenobia loses in a long match. So it's 1-1, and the last match is the tiebreaker. Rias gives a prep talk to Issei since he's all worried about holding her back. You know, he still has a lot of self-doubt in him. And even in the filler episodes, Rias is still being a good leader. She really has so much potential as a character. It's kind of sad that they couldn't capitalize off this, because even in all these filler stories, Rias has played a good mentor and leader role for Issei. Like the first one we talked about with Susan, how she really wanted him to get that contract so that he didn't lose confidence in himself. And now this one, she's trying to hype everyone up. So when it comes to that aspect of Rias' character, it actually is done really well. She's a great leader. But it's time for the tennis match to begin, and their opponents are Tennis Girl and this like Yeti monster thing. And Issei's pretty intimidated by this Yeti, and he even comments on the Yeti's quote-unquote big-ass tennis racket. But the Yeti makes the biggest mistake of her life. She laughs at Issei's appearance, and this makes Issei snap. So the match begins, and Issei's super motivated until he sees Rias and the Tennis Girl going back and forth, and he can't keep up. He completely loses all that aura and all that confidence that he had. There's a moment where the Yeti hits the ball and then it just blows up behind Issei and creates a crater behind him, and that was pretty funny. But right when it seems like our characters are going to lose, the mascot knight guy that was with the girl earlier goes over to Issei and tells him to put on his armor. He says that he's mad that the Yeti isn't a pretty girl, so he switched sides. I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but all the other tennis opponents were revealed as like beautiful monster women. Like the girl that Akeno and Zenobia faced both had Issei fantasizing, and he was expecting the tennis girl's partner to also be beautiful, but it ended up being this weird looking Yeti right here. So this made the knight and Issei really upset. So he and Issei fused together, and this was kind of a strange moment. This story is just kind of weird. It's a fun type of weird though. But they merged together, they finish the game and win. They kind of just skip over the entire game, they just win instantly. And Rias is able to do the interview, and Issei can't take the armor off, so he has to become the new tennis mascot, and that's how the story ends. And this story actually felt refreshing. It was nice getting something new that was actually funny. You know, since the other stories were stuff that we've already seen, and then just a weird story about Issei getting groomed. But it was nice getting a story that was actually done well and was actually entertaining. We also get to see Rias flourish as an entertaining character too. She was kind of funny in this story. And of course her leadership was really good too. Definitely an upgrade from the last story, so I'll give it like a 6.9 out of 10. The next story was surprisingly good. I really didn't think I would like it at first because the premise was dumb and it had me scared for a second, but it didn't go in the direction that I thought it would go. So this story starts in Issei's room. He's with Rias and Asia, except they're not the usual Rias and Asia. They've been turned into like little kids. So this plot kind of had me scared for a second because I thought they were gonna like sexualize the kid versions of Asia and Rias, but thankfully even Issei isn't a lolicon. He has no attraction to them, and they avoid putting them into any sexual situations. So thank you DxD authors and creators for not being weird. But Akeno calls a group meeting to discuss the issue of them turning into kids, and they figure out that Rias must have used the spell wrong and accidentally casted it on herself. So the whole premise of this story is just them trying to find the cure to the spell. But like I said earlier, Issei doesn't see the girls in a sexual way anymore, but instead he sees them more as his own kids. He becomes really protective of them, and it's kind of adorable. We get to see what dad Issei would be like. There's a moment where Issei told Gasper to make them laugh, but Gasper accidentally scares them, and Issei gets really mad at Gasper and makes him run away. So we get to see a new and interesting side of Issei, where he's not just a raging pervert. And that's really refreshing, since every story before this, Issei's entire character has just been him loving boobs. So we finally get something different. We even get this funny picture of him and Akeno being husband and wife taking care of the kids. We also get this funny moment with Issei, Matsuda, and Murahama. Issei goes to the convenience store with the kids, and then he runs into his old friends. And obviously they see Issei with these kids and think that he has kids now. So they get really upset at this, and they think that Issei's been tricking them this entire time, pretending he couldn't get laid, but secretly he had already had 2 kids. It was just like a funny little moment, and this is like the only time I wish that these stories were canon and brought up again. So this story was really able to reel me back in, but I really got back into it when the MVP of the story showed up. So Azazel shows up, and he's the guy with the plan. He comes up with the plan to reverse the spell, but they have to find the ingredients to reverse it. My favorite part about this whole mission is everyone does something except for Zenobia. She just sits there training Gasper. That's like all she's good for. But Issei, Akeno, and Azazel go together to find the ingredients, and they have to defeat a variety of monsters to get the ingredients. The first ingredient they need is a minotaur's liver, and Issei has to do it alone. So while Issei's doing that, Azazel sets up a picnic and relaxes. And I do want to point out that Akeno did not like the idea of having to go on a mission with Azazel. So that was pretty cool, and it makes sense. I really am glad that even in these filler arcs, we still get some hints of the story going on here. So it's not like they're completely uncanon, they're just like side quests that happen. And they're kind of here just so we can learn about different characters that don't get the spotlight in the actual story. But while Issei's struggling to get the liver, Azazel drops this banger line. I don't really feel like reading it, so I'll just leave it right here. Yeah man, Azazel's a beast. I said earlier that Issei's character changed in this story, but the one thing that didn't change about his character is his uselessness. Issei can't do it. He can't do anything. He's pretty useless in all of these stories. So he cries to Azazel for help, and Azazel actually agrees to help him. So he goes to help and he one-shots the Minotaur, and this makes like a whole group of Minotaurs mad and they try to attack them, but Azazel just blasts them away immediately. Even in random stories, Azazel is just the coolest character. So at this point in the story, Azazel is still significantly stronger than Issei, but the problem is he's too strong. His blast turned all the Minotaurs into ashes, so they couldn't get the livers. So Issei actually still has to defeat one by himself. Eventually they do end up getting the liver, and then they move on to the next thing. And the next ingredient is a unicorn horn. They decide to use Akeno as bait because these unicorns only go up to quote unquote pure virgins. And we get kind of an interesting moment with Azazel. He starts to admire Akeno's body, but like not in a sexual way. He admires it in like a proud father way. Since he's a fallen angel, he's glad that she's representing his side well. I think it's kind of an interesting take on Azazel, and it shows that he has a lot of pride in being a fallen angel. So we get to learn something new about him. But the unicorn bait works. The unicorn shows up, and when it gets close to Akeno, she blasts it and they get the unicorn horn. That little mission wasn't as good as the last one, but at least we got to learn something about Azazel. But the next mission is definitely the best one. The last thing they need is a dragon scale, and at first Issei has to fight the dragon by himself, but like usual he can't do it and he starts crying to Azazel, and Azazel actually helps him again, but not using his power. Instead he pulls out a giant robot as big as the dragon they're fighting, and that robot fights the dragon. Apparently he just keeps a giant robot under the school, which means he's just been secretly remodeling the school and making labs under the school without anyone knowing, which is kind of funny to think about. It's like he has an evil mind, but his heart isn't evil. It's like he was supposed to be a villain, but he just didn't feel like becoming a villain. But Azazel's robot beats the dragon with a rocket punch, and Issei asks who's stronger between Azazel and the robot, and Azazel says himself by a long shot. And then he drops this tough line for no reason. He says, how many times do we have to taint our hands in evil to escape from this way of life? He's just dropping church for no reason. I can't even remember why he said that, but it must have been a crazy reason. But anyways, Issei gets mad at Azazel because he thinks it's a waste of time for Azazel to make a robot that's weaker than him, and they start arguing, and while they're arguing, the dragon gets back up and tries to attack again, and Azazel just blasts it away in one hit, and they get the scale. So basically, Azazel did everything, carried the entire mission, and so far he's been carrying this entire volume with just this one story, but that's not really anything new from Azazel. I'm not even being a fanboy here, this is just the truth. But they return home, they do the reverse ritual, but while they're doing the ritual, Gasper runs in because he's being chased by Zenobia and pushes Issei into the circle, and I'm sure you can guess what happens next. Asia and Rias get reverted back to normal. They said they wanted to see Issei as a kid, so they tried using a spell that would turn him into a kid, but the spell backfired and turned them into kids. And luckily for them, when they look down, they see that Issei's been turned into a child because Gasper knocked him into the middle of the circle. All the girls are mesmerized by him, so Azazel just leaves him, and then the story just kind of ends right there, with Issei being a child forever. That one was pretty cool. Insane carry job by Azazel, but Issei was kind of annoying again. His constant crying just gets old sometimes, I'm sorry. But he did drop a tough line. I forgot to mention this, but Azazel asked Issei if he was put in a situation where he had to say Rias or Asia, who would he save? And Issei said that he would double his power and save both of them. So that's a pretty cool line from Issei. That's actually like one of my favorite lines that he said so far. But yeah, this story was still really entertaining and I enjoyed it. So I'll give it like a 7.2 out of 10. Pretty good stuff here. They should have adapted this story. Okay, so this video is getting kind of long, so let's pick up the pace and do a lightning round. Azazel's doing a surprise experiment on Issei. So Issei was trying to bring Azazel tea when Azazel made him go into a capsule for an experiment. He activated the capsule and it exploded. Issei wakes up and Azazel runs away. And when Issei goes back to the club room, he sees Asia getting her clothes blown away by a surprise enemy. Eventually, Zenobia is able to corner this demon down, and then it's revealed that the demon is just Issei. So what happened is Azazel cloned Issei for no reason. Issei was just trying to bring him some tea, he was trying to be a nice guy, and Azazel threw him in a capsule and cloned him. But it wasn't just one clone, it was actually 300, so they have a meeting to address this problem. There are 300 Isseis going around the school blowing all the girls' clothes away, and of course the ORC has to stop them. Of course Azazel does some Azazel things. He knocks out all the human girls and puts a barrier around them so that Issei can't do anything to them. You know, just Azazel being the coolest guy in the school, nothing new. So the plan is to eliminate all the Isseis, and Azazel says to not underestimate the fallen angels' technology, and he goes to think of like an actual strategy. And then he comes back with his strategy, a 3-step plan to eliminate all the Isseis. The first plan is fishing. Azazel gave out porno magazines on fishing rods, and the plan is to bait the clones in and blow them away. This is the fallen angel technology Azazel was talking about. And this plan actually works. Like, they're able to take down half of the clones just with that. It's kind of funny how dumb these clones are, but I guess they're just Issei to like the next level, so it's not too surprising. But there is a cool little moment where Koneko starts attacking the real Issei, thinking he was a clone. And it was just satisfying watching Issei getting beat up after all of that crying he was doing in the last story. But surprisingly, the clones figured out the trap and they stopped falling for it. And I do like this because it does show that Issei has some sneaky good battle IQ. You know, Issei sometimes has some good plans to take down his enemies. You know, like overloading Volley's wings, causing his armor to break, using fire to attack the shadow guy since he couldn't hit him with his regular fists, using holy items to beat Riser. Like, Issei has some sneaky good battle IQ. But then again, it took 150 clones dying before they realized that it was a trap. So maybe they're not that smart. But they go on to the next plan, and again, they're using Akano as bait. They love using her as bait for some reason. A bunch of clones approach Akano, and then she uses her lightning to take them out. And Issei starts feeling bad for the clones, and that surprisingly is important for later. There is a funny moment with Azazel where he records what's happening and sends it to his friends, and then him and Issei start fighting. Those two really are the only people keeping this volume alive. Like, no one else does anything except for Issei and Azazel. Even when Issei's being annoying, he's still kinda funny, so I can't really stay mad at Issei because he does goofy stuff that makes me laugh. But now there's pretty much no Isseis left, so they go on to the final plan. Azazel and Rias are on top of the clubhouse, and Azazel's dressed as a villain and Rias is dressed as a princess. So they're trying to bait the Issei clones into saving Rias from the evil Azazel, and of course the clones fall for it. It's kind of cute that the last resort wasn't using Issei's perversion against him, but it was using his love against him instead. I thought that was a cool thing that they did. But Azazel kills all of the clones except for one, and Azazel really starts getting into the role of being a villain. Even the real Issei starts getting into it. It was just kind of funny watching these characters play like exaggerated versions of themselves. But the last clone just won't die for some reason. No matter what Azazel blasts him with, he always gets back up. He's pretty much just reenacting what happened between Issei and Riser. And because of this, everyone in the ORC joins Issei in taking Azazel down. So it's like Azazel versus Issei, Issei's clone, Zenobia, Kiba, Konako, everyone you can think of besides Rias. They all charge my goat Azazel. And surprisingly, they actually catch him. For some reason, they decided to give Azazel the loss in this fight, and I'm not a big fan of Azazel losing. It leaves a bad taste in my mouth. Minus half a point for that. Azazel shouldn't be losing to these bums. But the clone Issei disappears because there was a time limit on how long they could last. So since all the clones were gone, Azazel was able to lift the barrier, wake all the kids up, and erase their memories of the clones, not of Issei, but of the clones. So all of the girls wake up and gather around Issei because they think that he's the one that stripped them naked by himself. So they're all like crowded around him while he's on top of the clubhouse, and then Konako picks him up and throws him into the crowd of girls, and then they all kill him or something, I don't know. And then the story ends right there. That wasn't really a lightning round. It was only like 300 words less than the other ones. But this story was still cool. It was entertaining. There wasn't any annoying characters. But there also weren't any characters that really stuck out in this story either, like how Azazel stuck out in the last story. But it was still okay. I'll give it like a 6.1 out of 10. Decently entertaining, but I wanted more from it. And now we're finally here, guys. We're on the last story. The only story that actually matters. And honestly, I think this was the best story of the volume. And this is kind of where my biggest problem with this volume is. This story should have been first. Why would you put the only story that picks up from the last volume at the end? Like, this story actually mentions the Loki fight and the upcoming school festival. So you would think they would want to put this first. It's just weird framing of the volume. And I would have just done it differently if I was the creators. But like I said, this story was still good, and it kicks off with Rias freaking out because Grafia is coming over. So Grafia has the day off and she wants to come over to Issei's house. Rias starts fixing up Issei's face and she refers to him as special, and for some reason Issei just can't figure out why. You know, just typical oblivious Issei stuff, and I'll let it slide for now. But Grafia arrives, and we actually get a cool little scene where we meet one of Sir Zek's pawns. His name is Inku, and he's like a sacred creature, which makes Sir Zex the only person to make a sacred creature into a servant. So that's just some more Sir Zex hype, I guess, since they don't really want to show him off in the story yet. But Rias and Grafia have their little chat, and then Grafia locks in on Issei and says, "What's left is the gentleman," in kind of a vague way. And Rias and Akano seem to understand what this meeting was really about. So since Rias broke off the engagement with Riser, the Grimmery family is kind of worried that she won't find love or something. So they want her to hurry up and find her next man, which is obviously going to be Issei. So they have to make sure he's qualified to be her next husband. And we also find out that other devils have been talking bad about Rias since she called off the engagement, which is actually good to know because they kind of just act like nothing happens in the anime. Rias comes from one of the most powerful families, and she called off an engagement with another powerful family, and nobody ever mentions it again in the anime. It's just kind of weird. So I'm glad they actually mention it and they talk about it here. But Grafia says that she sided with Rias during the whole breakup thing because she had a similar story, but she wants Issei to marry as soon as she leaves high school so that she can have a good reputation with the underworld, and so she could be seen as like a high class lady. And while Graphia is overloading us with information, we get a surprise appearance from Sir Zex. And I'm so glad Sir Zex is in this volume. He's so cool, he's so interesting, and he's just like a cool dude to be here. He's like a nice refreshing face. You know, the typical Rias Asia Rias, it just kind of gets boring after a while. So it's always nice to see different people getting a spotlight, and Sir Zex kind of just steals the show in this volume. But after Sir Zex appears, we get some more club room goofiness. Sir Zex starts embarrassing Rias with baby photos, and Graphia starts attacking Sir Zex because he's not supposed to be here. And I always like moments like this, you know, watching our characters act like actual people instead of just characters for plot. It's just nice seeing them do real life things. But while that's happening, the other three Satans appear in like a holographic form, kind of like how Lady Phoenix did in that one episode. And then we get more club room goofiness, except with just the 4 Satans, which is always fun. We get to actually learn about the other 3 Satans, which was really interesting. We find out what type of character Falbium is. He's actually just a lazy bum. He doesn't do anything for himself. This man used up all his lifespan so that he could get servants to work for him so he doesn't have to do anything. We also learned the roles of the Satans. So apparently Falbium is the best strategist in the underworld, so he controls the military. Seraphal does the foreign affairs, which actually makes sense why she's with the kids during the Kyoto arc. And Ajika is the smartest character in the underworld, so he invents new technology for everyone. So we actually get really important info here, which is kind of why I don't get why they would put this story last. It still doesn't make sense to me. I'm sure there's a lot of people who skipped this volume because they thought it was a bunch of nothing. But Sir Zex says he wants Issei and Rias to do like a ritual / ceremony at the Ruins of Connection. Rias' family wants her to pass these tests with the person that she holds the most dear, so that they don't have to worry about her not finding someone to marry. And that's pretty much the main plot of this story. It's Issei and Rias doing trials together, and it's pretty entertaining, I can't lie. So they go to the ritual place, and while they're waiting outside, they get surprised by 5 Power Rangers. And I'm not even joking. The 4 Satans plus Graphia decided to dress up as Power Rangers to hide their identity, but obviously Issei sees right through it. Sir Zex is the Red Ranger, Azuka is the Blue Ranger, Falbium is the Green Ranger, Seraphal is pink, and Graphia is yellow. They're cosplaying as Power Rangers, and they're there to help guide Issei and Rias through the ruins so that they can complete the ritual. And I think the best part was how into it Sir Zex was. He's really entertaining in this story. But they explained that there's 3 trials that Rias and Issei need to get through together. And while they're explaining this, we actually get a pretty cool moment. Leviathan sees something in the sky, and for some reason, all of the Power Rangers decide to attack it at the same time. And these 5 don't just shake Issei, they don't just shake the ground, they don't just shake the mountain, they don't just scare every animal in the vicinity, but they also rip a hole in the dimension. Like, these characters are way stronger than I initially thought. And it's just nice to finally see what they can do, because all we got from them is just hype. You know, they're the leaders of the underworld, they have to be strong. But we actually kind of get to see it here, even if it's just played off as a joke. But Rias and Issei go through the trials, and they go to the first trial room, which is being ran by Leviathan, and their mission is to dance elegantly. Luckily for Issei, he learned how to be a proper devil earlier in the story, so they're able to pull this off pretty easily. But this scene was kind of disappointing. We could have gotten a good scene between Issei and Rias of them just interacting with each other, because usually they're good at those scenes, but instead they kind of just skip over the whole dancing thing, which is fine too, I guess. But they move on to the next trial, and it's being run by Falbium, and it's a table manners trial. Basically, all these trials are just testing Issei to see if he's proper enough for Rias. It's pretty funny when you realize the reason why they're there, but they kind of just skip through all the trials. It's like the author had the idea of putting these trials in here, but didn't really feel like fleshing them out too much, because they passed the first 2 trials instantly. So they go on to the next trial, and while they're on their way there, Issei asks about Graphia's past that was mentioned earlier, and Rias tells us about how Sir Zex and Graphia got together. And I'll try to explain this the best way I can. I think I might have missed something. But during the war, there was a disagreement between devil factions over whether they should stop the war or not. So there were two sides, an anti-war side and a pro-war side. Sir Zex was on the anti-war side and Graphia was on the pro-war side, and these two fell in love. And honestly, that's kind of all we learned about their relationship. That was like the only thing they said. But they also tell us that the war ended because all the groups needed to replenish their numbers. But even though the war was over, there were still disagreements between the pro and anti-war sides. I mean, we even see this in the anime with Xiaoba and his friends. But eventually, the pro-war side was forced to the edge of the underworld, and then the current Devil Society was created. You know, a much more peaceful society. But pretty much, Graphia and Sir Zex just loved each other during the war, and then just became closer and closer after it. So they fell in love despite being on opposite sides of the political spectrum. And honestly, I was kind of disappointed by this story, because it's not really much of a story. The only thing I learned from that story was that Graphia and Seraphal were fighting for the strongest female devil spot in the underworld, which I guess makes Milicus like the greatest prospect since LeBron James, since he's a combination of Sir Zex and Graphia. But we get a nice moment where Rias starts comparing herself to Sir Zex. She starts doubting herself since she's way weaker than him, and we finally get some character work from Rias again. I mean, it's been about 6 volumes since we've got anything from her. But Issei hugs her and he comforts her, and then he drops this banger line. He says, "Busho's worries are something that I can't imagine, but there wasn't a single time where I thought you were useless." It was a really cute moment, and I love locked in Issei. Honestly, I think I like him more than goofball Issei, because we get to see that he's actually a good guy. But after Issei says that, Rias kind of mumbles to herself. She says that she's still just called president by Issei. So we get the seeds planted for the worst scene in the entire series, but at least it doesn't come out of nowhere, which again just makes me wonder why they would put this story last. If we have this moment right here, where Rias starts talking about Issei only calling her president for the entire series, this is the first time she's mentioned it as a problem, in a volume filled with nonsense. It just makes no sense. But Issei didn't hear her say this, and they move on to the next trial, which is being ran by Ajuka, and he makes them take a test about the underworld. Rias gets a perfect score, but Issei I guess didn't do super well, because Ajuka makes him answer a bonus question. He makes him name all the 72 pillars of the devil's houses, but he's able to pretty easily name all the 72 pillars, and he passes the trial. I don't know why in season 1 they make it seem like there's only 3 pillars left. It was a really weird thing that they did, and it kind of just made things confusing when Cyborg came in as like part of the Bale family, but maybe I just interpreted it wrong. So they finished the trials and they passed all of them, so they get to continue on to the end. They end up in a coliseum where the red and yellow rangers are, and the red ranger challenges Issei to a fight, and they actually fight. Yeah, we get to see Issei vs Sir Zex on a random volume. Why is this volume happening at the end? But they start fighting, and Sir Zex's power is kind of scary, honestly. It completely annihilates anything it touches. Somehow Issei does manage to last 10 minutes with Sir Zex, but he can't hit him. His ranged attacks get completely annihilated, and he isn't good enough at melee combat to take Sir Zex on. So it's a very one-sided battle. But Sir Zex tells Issei that he can't have Rias if he doesn't put up a fight. So Issei tries to pull out his fire breathing technique that he learned from Tanin, which was pretty cool at first, but then Sir Zex again just destroys it immediately. His power is just complete destruction. Even Drake says that he can destroy anything with his powers. But Issei's almost out of it, and Graphia tells Issei to touch Rias's breast for a power-up, and he does it without any thought. He touches her breast, he gets the power-up, and he decides to put all of his power into one single dragon shot, and he shoots it at Sir Zex and passes out. He wakes up later, and then Drake says that Sir Zex just absorbed the blast with his destructive powers again. So Sir Zex is kind of crazy. This is a post-Loki fight Issei too, so Sir Zex is actually really crazy. But Drake also says that Issei has gotten a lot stronger, and he would have lost instantly if it was him a few months ago. And that is something that they always have done right with High School DxD. Issei's character progression has been done really well. He progresses both as a fighter and as a person, and it's just done so well. But let's go ahead and wrap this video up here. I'm starting to get a little tired. The Satans congratulate them for completing the trials, and Ajuka looks inside Issei and he updates Issei's evil piece because it was malfunctioning due to the Juggernaut drive. We also learned that Ajuka Asuka and Sir Zex are best friends and rivals, and Asuka is like the only person that can actually match Sir Zex in strength. But he finishes the update on Issei and gives him like a cryptic message about his powers and how to unlock them. And Issei compares Asuka to Azazel, and he says that they should be friends. But Asuka says that Azazel researches and creates things that already exist while he creates from nothing. So I guess Asuka is just an Azazel hater. So I guess I don't like Asuka no more. That's kind of crazy how that works. But yeah, apparently Asuka is like the smartest character in the entire series. And I'm just not realizing this, but Azazel's kind of a mix of all of the Satans. He's got a lot of compassion like Sir Zex, but he's also obviously really smart like Asuka. He's a really good strategist like Falbium, and he's always there when the kids are talking to people from other mythologies, which is Seraphul's job. So he's kind of a mix of all four of the Satans, and I'm just not realizing that, but that's kind of cool to think about. But before everybody's ready to go home, Sir Zex says that the Sour Orc fight has been confirmed and it will happen after the trip to Kyoto. So we're finally on to season 4 and the last 2 volumes. And then Rias and Issei fly off into the sunset together and whatever. And they promise to be together forever, and we get ready for volume 9. So you know, a good end to a nothing volume. Honestly, this volume was kind of unnecessary, but I guess it was entertaining. They really should have just added that last story first because it's actually so important and it actually gives you so many details about the Satans and Issei's power. But I'll give that last story like a 7.5 out of 10. It was cool. We actually got to see some progress with Issei and Rias' relationship, and we got to learn about the Satans, so again, that was pretty cool. But yeah, this volume had its ups and it had its downs. It's hard to give it a fair rating since it isn't an actual complete volume, so I'll just give it like a 5 out of 10, perfectly down the middle. It was a little disappointing since I was really excited to continue the story from where we left off, and obviously that didn't happen, but it was still a really entertaining volume, and I still did enjoy my time the further I got into it. For the MVP award, it'll be shared by Issei and Azazel. I couldn't pick between the two. Issei was kind of annoying sometimes, but he also had some good moments, and Azazel had the best moments in the volume, but he wasn't there for every story, so I couldn't decide which one to choose, so I just chose both of them. I'm too tired to think of anything profound to say. It's like 4 a.m, so just go ahead and end the review right there. These volume reviews are crazy. They take so long to record. Like this right here is like another hour-long recording, but it's not just an hour long, it's an hour of me stopping, going back, re-recording lines, doing all that. So it actually ended up taking me like 3 hours to record this entire video, but whatever, I guess. I don't know what video will be next. It'll be out when it's out. But yeah, I can tell this video is going to be really long, so I'm gonna go ahead and get out of here. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.